Dr. Tim Germon, who was part of the show, is actually here with us tonight. And aside from being a character in Tristan's play, he's a consultant spinal neurosurgeon at Derriford Hospital, and he's been that since 2001. He focuses mostly on keyhole spinal surgery as well as reconstructive spinal surgery from trauma and cancer. His current research interests include, this was really interesting, we had a conversation about this yesterday, causes and management of back pain and measuring outcomes from spinal surgery. And the person who's going to run this little discussion is my sister, Lenore Rosenberg. She's a social worker who's been the patient care coordinator at St. Charles Rehab Albertson for 18 years in Nassau County in Mineola. And this particular clinic specializes in outpatient neurological and orthopedic rehab located in Mineola. As I said, they work with physical, occupational, and speech therapy services, and it's particularly known for their spinal cord work with spinal cord injury patients. Lenore established a support group for spinal cord injury patients, which has been ongoing for 20 years. So, and then we have Tristan, who of course you all know. And then we have Katy. Who, of course, because she needed chips and couldn't fall back to sleep, actually saved his life.
It was nothing to do with Tim.
And Katy's a director in her own right, and she and Tristan founded a wonderful theater company called Damn Fino, and they do lots of, what would you say? Improvisation, go ahead.
Yeah, we kind of make little happenings in Bristol where we're based at the moment, but we kind of, yeah, we make little theatrical tastings and happenings at the moment. We're quite a young company at the moment.
And Tristan, in addition to doing this piece, I guess his most recent work was as Peter Pan in Bristol, and the Queen came to visit him. So
I met the Queen.
The Queen saw you fly. Yes.
So now I'm going to turn over the panel to start with Tim and then everybody else. So here you go.
Thank you. Can you hear me if I don't use a microphone? We'd like, first of all, I'd very much like to thank the team here at St. Anne's Warehouse, because I love coming to the United States. I think
Sam, we can't hear you.
I love coming to the United States. It's a fantastic country, but I've never had the opportunity to come to New York, so to be invited here was really a fantastic opportunity. So thank you very much to everybody here. I thought you might like to have a bit more technical detail about the management of spinal injuries. And so I've got here what is a very short guide to spinal injuries. And we want this to be an interactive occasion. So if you want to interrupt any time and ask a question, please feel free. I know doctors and surgeons in particular are very intimidating, but please feel free to
I'm going to ask him stuff as well, because there's stuff that I've forgotten and I want to clear up as well.
Okay, so I think we have to start at the beginning, and the beginning is understanding what your spine is supposed to do before it gets injured. So you can see I'm not really David Hockney when it comes to using an iPad, but this is how it was supposed to be when Tristan was on the way back up the hill. So he's sitting on what is thought to be a shallow wall. He's on the phone to Katy. He should have her chips in one hand. I'm not sure whether they were there or not. But the point is, here, in this position, his spine is doing what it's designed to do. And your spine is designed to keep your head, which is there, balanced on top of your pelvis. That's what it does. And it does that by supporting your weight on this column of bone. And this column is made up of these individual blocks of bone, and they're like cotton reels stacked on top of one another. But they're separated from each other by these things, which are the intervertebral discs. And the discs permit movement to occur between the adjacent bones, and that's what gives your spine flexibility. And you really have a very large degree of flexibility, particularly in your cervical spine, your neck. And that most flexible bit of your spine supports the 5 kilogram weight of your head.
Which in pounds is
2.2 pounds per kilogram.
12, 11 or 12.
Yeah. I find it odd that the most advanced nation on earth still uses now, we take everything for granted in our lives, but has anyone, we achieve an awful lot balanced on our feet. It's amazing. Have any of you ever wondered why you don't fall over when you pick something up? Why don't you fall over? Because when you pick something up, isn't the first thing that comes into your head Newton's third law of motion? It's not. Okay, well, Newton's third law of motion is that for each action, there has to be an equal and opposite reaction. There is always an equal and opposite reaction. And what happens in your spine, the equal and opposite reaction is generated by the muscles of your back. So your spine is actually functioning like that, like a cantilever crane. And the fulcrum is your vertebral column. When you lift something up, the equal and opposite force is supplied by the muscles of your back, which act as a counterbalance to the weight on the end of the boom. But it's much more complicated, because within the musculoskeletal structure of the vertebral column is contained your very delicate spinal cord. And your spinal cord is like a great big cable conducting nerves to and from your brain to the rest of your body. And it's this very intimate relationship between the spinal cord and the spinal nerves and the bone that surrounds it that lies at the very heart of spinal surgery. And whenever you think about spinal pathology or a spinal operation, you have to consider the impact that that pathology or surgery is going to have on the structure of the bone and the structure of the spinal cord and spinal nerves. So, that's how it's supposed to be, but it isn't quite how it was, because that wall isn't a shallow wall, it's quite a high wall. And Tristan falls backwards into the void, head first. Now, I actually rang up my physics teacher from when I was 18 and asked him to help me work out the physics, but you'll see I just concluded that we'll just make do with the rough calculation that he's accelerating at 9.81 meters per second. I've got no idea what that is in imperial. There we are. And now his neck is supporting the 65 kilograms of his body, and that, when his head hits the ground, that's approximate to a 4-ton weight landing on your head. So that alone could kill him. That's a potentially fatal blow. And the most delicate part of your spine is your cervical spine, so it's likely that a force that great will deform your cervical spine beyond its elastic limit, and it's likely to snap. This is a vertebral column which has snapped between the 5th and 6th cervical vertebra. And this bony injury really isn't the major problem, because if you realign those bones, that will heal. The importance of it really lies in the damage done to the spinal cord, which is adjacent to it. So, a complete spinal cord injury means really that the spinal cord is functionally severed. It rarely means that it's severed completely, but what it means is no messages are going up and down, so it's functionally severed. Precisely what this means to the patient really depends on the exact site of the injury. The nearer the brain the injury occurs, the greater the impact. If your injury is below the level of C7, that's quite crucial, because below the level of C7 you retain elbow extension. You can straighten your elbow, and if you can straighten your elbow you can lift your own body weight, and if you can lift your own body weight you can be reasonably independent. But even at this level, if you've got a complete cord injury, you can't move your legs, you can't feel your legs, you've got no control of your bladder or bowel, no sexual function, no voluntary sexual function. Above C7, you start to lose more and more function of your upper limbs. And above C4, the muscles which enable you to breathe are affected.
We'll try that one.
Thank you. Now, it's not quite that simple, because if you have a blow to your spinal cord, you can be initially completely paralysed in the same way that you can be knocked unconscious and make a full recovery. But for the time being, Tristan's in a pretty serious way. You know, he's paralysed. He's actually suffocating. What he's describing when he can't breathe is when he can't speak because he can't get enough breath, and he's feeling tired because he isn't getting rid of the carbon dioxide that's building up in his blood. So he actually is suffocating. And the future for him at this stage is really very uncertain. And his vertebral column is unstable. That means it can't do what it's designed to do. And if you remember, what it's designed to do is keep your head balanced on top of your pelvis. And if he were to try to do that, it would just collapse further and he would risk damaging his spinal cord even more. And that is why, if you have a patient who's suspected of having a spinal injury, you have to make sure that they're kept in alignment, and particularly have their neck immobilized. And it's a testament to the skill of the ambulance crew, really, that the first x-ray which was taken of Tristan's neck is this one. And you can see that the bones are almost in perfect alignment. An x-ray doesn't give you too much detail, but on this x-ray you can see the fragment of bone which we call the teardrop, and you can also see that there is some malalignment between the 5th and 6th vertebra. The 5th vertebra there is moved slightly backwards on the 6th vertebra there. A CT scan gives you a bit more bony detail, but it doesn't tell you anything about the spinal cord itself, which requires an MRI scan, and this is Tristan's MRI scan. Just to orientate you, he's looking to the left and he's been effectively cut down the middle. That's the base of his brain, and your brain and spinal cord float in fluid called cerebral spinal fluid, and that's white here. And here you can see the bones of the vertebral column. So it goes bone, disc, bone, disc, bone, disc, abnormal bone, abnormal disc, bone. And this is the site of the impact, and the spinal cord at that point is swollen and there's a white streak within it, and that is where the spinal cord has been damaged. So what are the principles of management from this point onwards? Well, the first thing is you have to realign the bones of the vertebral column and keep them realigned, and also take any pressure which might remain off the spinal cord. So you realign it. Once you've realigned it, you have to keep it there. And as with most things in medicine, there are various options, and each option comes with potential risks and benefits, and there's very rarely one perfect answer. But in Tristan's case, the options really were a halo, which does have its benefits. it's the least invasive option, but it also has risks. The pins that he mentions can come loose, they can become infected. The rate at which the risk of the bone not healing properly and requiring an operation at a later date is, there is a risk. And also, I think it is important that you end up with 2 pretty unpleasant scars in your forehead. Which might not sound important, but I think it has to go into the equation. The other option is surgery. And surgery is no doubt has much higher risks associated with it, but there are great benefits as well. And most spinal operations can either be done from the front of the neck or from the back of the neck. So an anterior approach looks something like this, and you end up with an X-ray looking something like that. But in his case, I thought if he wanted an operation from the back would be more sensible. And the reason is that if I did an operation from the back, I would only need to fuse the 5th vertebra to the 6th vertebra. But if I did it from the front, I would have to fuse the 4th vertebra to the 6th vertebra, so he would have more of his neck fused. And from my point of view, the high stress that was associated with meeting Tristan was discussing the operation with him and his family. We were all obviously extremely concerned. And I had to explain what the surgery involved. And most operations, so I was going to use a technique called lateral mass screws. And when you look at most techniques in a textbook, it looks very easy. You see a drawing of a bone, and it says, put your screw in there. And you do. It's really easy. But it's not. And because if I show you a drawing of an individual cervical vertebra, what you have to do is put a bone in each lateral mass, one on each side, in the 2 bones. So you have to put a screw in there. And what you can't see is that the spinal cord is very close. There. There's a big nerve going down your arm there, and one below. And this red thing ahead of you is one of the arteries that goes to your brain. So you just have to get your trajectory right. And most of the time you do. And it's actually very rewarding, because as Tristan experienced, you know, you do the operation, the neck's fixed, it's a stable situation, the spinal column can now do what it was designed to do, and you can mobilise the patient. And it doesn't affect the neurological function. Very rarely affects the neurological function, so the operation didn't directly help his spinal cord recover, but I'm sure, like me, you're all delighted that it did, because we were able to see this wonderful performance this evening. Thank you.
No one interrupted. Very intimidating.
Okay, so first of all, I'd like to say that I don't know how to use a microphone. We came from 2 different families. What I'd like to say is my congratulations to Katy, to Tristan, and to Dr. Tim for an incredibly miraculous recovery. And a team effort that is fantastic to see. And my thanks to you for sharing your journey with us. But now I'm going to ask some questions.
Great.
So first of all, you said that at first you didn't want to tell your story. And when did you decide that you could? And why did you decide that you could?
Well, when I came out of the hospital, that was it for me. That was it. Tim, you know, I shouldn't have gone, I don't think, from hospital as soon as I did, but that was thanks to Tim, because he knew that the best place for me was to get out of the hospital and start the recovery. Spring was really starting, and I needed a bit of vitamin D. I just needed to get away from that place, and it was such a traumatic thing, and I thought, phew, I got away lightly there. And so that's why I wanted to put it behind me and not let it define me and just move on. You know, I'd come so close to some dark things there. So that is why, and I thought, well, that's fine, I'm not going to let it define me. So to try and recap it very, very quickly, it was from reading those books that I decided to tell the story. It was from reading Shelley from Frankenstein, and she put it so eloquently, the whole thing of sensation and this creature rediscovering sensation, and that journey, which was a much longer one, the physio journey, which was a longer road of suddenly realizing about sense and touch, and we had this new baby arriving and sort of discovering different ways of feeling and sensing the world, and I thought it was extraordinary, this beautiful piece of poetic text that she'd written that was so apt and it expressed so well sort of feelings that I had. And so in a very kind of tentative way, years later, I thought, well, maybe I could do a version of Frankenstein and use my story as a kind of a backstory. And that's sort of how I started to kind of very tentatively tell this story. Because I suppose, I mean, it feels very small to me, you know, as anyone's kind of own personal stories do. And being a beast of the theatre, you look to bigger stories. And but then it made sense that I just tell this story myself, and it's something I can give back to other people. It can become a universal thing. It could just become a story. So it wasn't a cathartic thing. It just felt that way. People were interested about that recovery, and so I realised. Yeah, so I'm waffling now.
No, but it doesn't come across as cathartic. It doesn't come across as self-involved at all. It's just a beautiful piece of theatre, that I've seen now twice. I can't say enough. I wanted to ask Dr. Tim, if I ever get hurt, we got to fly over here. But how did you feel about the show? Feelings. Surgeons have them.
Yeah, well, I've seen it 4 times now, and yeah, I was stunned. I was stunned actually by how one person could do a show like that all on their own and play different people and make you feel like laughing and crying at the same time. And my children have seen it twice as well, and they were completely transfixed by it. They couldn't decide whether they wanted to be an actor or a doctor. And then because when I first saw it, I didn't know that I was sort of mentioned in it. And one of the skills I recognised among many that Tristan obviously has was that we'd only met each other for a very short time really. And I thought, he said he was me on the stage, and I thought, crikey, he's got a bit of me there. And I felt like he'd, if you use PowerPoint, you can take the format of one slide and use a pipette, suck it out and put it in another slide. And I felt like he'd sort of managed to extract something from a very brief meeting with me, and I thought that was a real skill. So I think it's an incredible achievement on many levels, actually.
And he did say those things. He did actually say we all have our off days or something.
But it is that thing of, Tim talked about the family, and we've often discussed this, is through memory, and I tell the story from my perception, and I know things are different, timescales are different, and I'm kind of organising it in the best way that I can, as you do when you try and tell an event or a story in your own life. But to me, it was just me and Tim in that room. And I remember and I must have blanked my entire family out. But Tim was there. He was like dealing with this palpable stress of my entire family, willing him to do, and then Tim was really concentrating, having to walk that incredibly difficult line of not, painting a rosy picture, and not, as you said, you have to give the facts in the most, but in the same way, you have a real skill, and I could tell he's wearing this crazy tie. And that really sticks in my mind, which I'm now going to put back in the show after seeing that.
That was the morphine. That was the
morphine. But there was this incredible communication from this man. It was incredible that I knew. In the show, I kind of painted it as a decision that I've expanded, but it was an enormous decision, but made very, very quickly because of the way that Tim explained things in this desperate situation. So,
and meanwhile, the rest of the family would take, the registrar took us to another room and convinced us that halo brace was the best and safest and only option. So me and your mum and your sister were just terrified as we helped your hand sign the form to say that he was going to go for the operation. But you were convinced, and being a physical actor, as well as a man who was about to become a father, you just felt there was no way you could spend that time incarcerated after feeling imprisoned anyway, on your back paralysed for a month, that you felt it would be a further, I remember you saying, be a further incarceration, and
I couldn't handle it. I couldn't handle that. I can't begin to imagine how people do, because for me I was very claustrophobic. But it was definitely, the decision was made when Tim said, he said we all have our off days. In a really, and it was beautiful, because that was like, that's it, you're the man for me. Absolutely 100%.
Was it a real specific individual at the end that you met with the halo brace, and if so, do you know how he ended up?
He's actually a friend of Tim's.
Oh.
He's called Kieran.
Didn't trust you, did he?
Kelvin. And yeah, he made a full recovery, didn't he?
But he had to have the operation after, didn't he? The halo brace didn't work for him.
He got a non-union, so he had a halo. Bone didn't heal properly, so I ended up operating anyway.
But he's all right.
Yeah, he's fine. It wasn't such a severe injury in the first place.
Okay, that's just a bit key, that it sounds like a platitude. However, I will say that every spinal cord injury, C5, is different from every other. So how these decisions get made, whether anybody makes a full recovery or not, very many people do not make full recoveries. Where I work, we mostly deal with people who do not make those full recoveries. In this case, I'm just thrilled to be in the presence of all three of you who were able to make that recovery, to work very hard. What you don't get a sense of is how hard you probably really worked to make that full recovery. How long did it actually take you?
I think from leaving hospital to what I would say fluid walking and fluid movement, it was probably 18 months. That was every day. Yeah.
That's great.
It was literally just, yeah.
You were sort of wasted, like really, really thin, and completely, he describes it in the piece, but it was a shadow of his former self, and used to just shuffle around the lawn, and then he'd take steps around the village, and his family would help around the village, and gradually, day by day, but he was just determined. He almost wouldn't look at anybody else, just straight ahead, with the kind of aim of being able to, he used to say to me, I want to be able to play my guitar again, play my guitar and hold my son, so that when Hector was born, a few months later, you could do that, even though you couldn't feel how soft his skin was. You could hold him, and you could be a hands-on father, more or less, from the off. And then you were back on stage, and that was another goalpost for Tris as a physical performer, knowing your body before the accident, and then continuing to know the body afterwards, and retraining as best as he could those neural pathways to go back on stage and use your limbs. And
but I was lucky being a physical performer, I suppose, in the sense that I could understand my body. Sorry, you were... Yes.
I was going to ask one of the fact that you are very physical, big connection between your brain and your body. Doctor, do you think somebody who's like that should be very
I don't think it's going to affect whether the neurons that are damaged are going to heal or not.
No, I don't mean that. Once they decide to heal in their body.
Well, all you can do is compensate for whatever deficiency is left. And I think work probably pays dividends in whatever domain. You mean that if you've got a muscle that doesn't work, the harder you work to use strategies that enable you to achieve the same goal in another way, I guess the more likely you are to achieve that goal.
So here's another question. Do you actually... Oh, is someone asking? Go ahead.
Tristan, when was your first performance back on stage, and what was that experience like?
Oh, it was amazing. I was very lucky. I've worked for the last 25 years with a company called Knee High Theatre, and It was Emma Rice. Before this accident, I was doing a show called Tristan and Isolde, which I'm actually going back to do in England when I finish here, which is kind of crazy. But we made that show, the accident happened, and then it was going to the National Theatre in London, and that was in October. That was the October of that year. So it was early October. And I went back and I wasn't moving properly, but Emma she was brilliant because she was there on the day. She was there the day it happened. She came when we were in hospital in Truro and saw this smashed, figure, and was amazing and said, it's yours, it's your part, and you make it however he is, because the character is kind of broken anyway. So it's great. She gave me the opportunity, and it was like getting back on a horse, and it was the perfect thing for me to do. That was a classic case of I can forget it now. I can do this, because that was another way of me burying it and moving on. So it was it.
The first time you were on stage without an audience.
Yeah, and it was great because then I could work out how this new body was working, and I could kind of like make sense of it, and I could do things I couldn't do before, and it was actually. In a lot of ways, it's it's been an incredible thing for me to have gone through that experience, because it totally alters the way you view life and decisions you make. So I was incredibly lucky to have that. So, yeah.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Was his inebriation, did that have anything to do with how his body received the impact when he fell?
Well, it's interesting, alcohol, because there are lots of people looking at lots of drugs to try and prevent what's called secondary injury, when you've had a brain injury usually, but possibly a spinal cord injury as well. There is a hypothesis that if you give certain drugs, it might prevent these secondary events. And I was involved in some research about 10 years ago, and one of the chemicals which might actually achieve that is alcohol. I think the problem is that the bad side of alcohol easily outweighs any theoretical good side. And it's almost certain, isn't it, that if you hadn't have been drinking, you wouldn't have fallen off the wall.
Yeah, but if I hadn't phoned you, then you wouldn't have fallen off.
Yeah. Oh, he never said that, did he?
No.
Go ahead, sir.
When you have included in the play how frightening it was, several times you commented on how frightening it was and how you left alone. You don't really convey how long that went on. I'm interested in what were you thinking? How long were you conscious but didn't know what was possible?
It was very difficult to judge because of this, the fact that you have to be moved all the time for the prevention of pressure sores. So I was never allowed to. I had no sense of time. I'm probably the worst person to ask, because for me, I was constantly going through this thing where my world had turned upside down. I thought that I was awake and I was just doing ordinary things, and then I realized all the time, oh no, I'm not. I'm immobile and I'm paralyzed, and that was happening all the time. So I was so disorientated. The sense of time of how long I was. Do you mean how long I was in before the operation, or?
No, I was actually asking about your perception, because you say you're really frightened when you're left alone.
Oh, the night times were endless.
Not knowing what the exit was might be the recovery, and just dealing with that. It must have been terrible.
It was, and I don't really try not to go into I mean, I've obviously edited an enormous amount out in terms of the darker side of it, because it was horrendous for me. I was going insane because it was just, the evenings would just open up into this black kind of void of this constant cycle of, I'm all right, I'm not all right, I'm all right, and your brain is an incredible thing in terms of building these worlds, these very vivid worlds, and then, so I edited a lot of that out, I think, but it just seemed to go on forever.
But what was the actual time between his admission to the hospital till the surgery?
I think it was less than a week.
A week? Less than a week.
Less than a week.
And in our discussion, you said that part of the reason, well, he had to make the decision, but you said also it was related to swelling.
Yeah, I mean, you can see on the MRI scan that the spinal cord at the site of the injury is swollen. It fills the spinal canal at the site of the injury. It's swollen. And to do the operation, you have to move the patient, and the patient's paralysed, and they're anaesthetised, and you have to turn them to lie on their front so that you can do the operation, and that is a hazard in itself. And if you think, if the spinal cord is swollen and it's filling up the spinal canal, any movement of the spinal column is going to potentially cause harm. Whereas if the cord is less swollen and there's a bit more room, there's a bit more compensation in the system. That's not evidence-based, but it's it's what most of us think is reasonable. So that's why we often wait. If he had a very badly displaced fracture, it would have been different, because then the imperative is to get the pressure off the spinal cord, although there's no evidence that that really improves outcome in most cases. It just seems like a sensible thing to do. But I think it was
It was bank holiday. I remember we had to wait for quite a long time for the operation because there was this bank holiday and shortage of staff. And then we got you. But also, I nearly moved him when we found him. Me and Andy Carnegie, who's since become a friend, who turned out to be this retired paramedic. My instinct was make him comfortable because he looked like a kind of rag doll. You know, he was like a zigzag back to front, just trapped in this. You know, the wall was 10 foot, but the space between the two walls was less than a metre, and it was dark. And I just kept shouting, make him comfortable, make him comfortable. And when I ran off to his sister's house, I brought back a pillow, and I brought back water, and I was just, as a girlfriend and a mother-to-be, just wanted to make him comfortable. But if I'd moved him, I would have certainly have caused a lot of damage. But the man I was with kept me out of the picture. Kept me calm.
Yes, sir.
Tristan, how cautious are you now when you're going into rehearsals? You're such a physical actor. How cautious are you? Do you change what you're doing? Do you shy away from certain things?
Do you know, in rehearsals, in plays, I'm no different. But since becoming a father, I think but I think that's the same for anybody. I think, in a way, I maybe think about things twice. But yeah, no, I've gone the other way in a way, and
He just jumped off. He played Peter Pan at Christmas. He jumped 200 foot off the top of a department store in Bristol and flew down into the city to turn on the Christmas lights. So he's.
But I had wires that time.
Yeah, but you could see where you were going. But he's fearless still.
I know you're fundraising for spinal research and so forth, and I'd like to hear about some of the advances that the research has accomplished.
Me.
Anybody? I think you're a miracle.
Well, the research, it's such a huge field. I mean, at one end of the...
Could you use the mic?
Sorry, yes. It's such a huge field. At one end, you've got incredibly intricate biochemical research looking at how to regenerate spinal cord cells from stem cells. At the other end, you've got techniques to improve the surgical management of the bones, of the broken bones, and there's everything in between. And then you've got ways of trying to mobilize people who have got severe or complete spinal cord injuries using using motors effectively to move the joints. So it's such a huge field. It's there is never going to be one solution. People will always, unfortunately, have accidents. There will always be spinal injuries, and I don't think any one lead of research is going to provide an answer to everything.
Yes, sir.
Curious, how much, if anything, did surgery and rehab cost?
How much did you cost medically? How much did you have to pay for all of this intervention?
National Health Service. But we were told how much it would have cost had we had to pay it, and it was hundreds of thousands of pounds. You know, you're talking air ambulances, the surgery, the time in hospital, the aftercare. I mean, hundreds of thousands of pounds. But obviously, taxpayers, British NHS system. I mean, it was an incredible, our experience of the NHS, or as a family member watching a loved one go through that hospital system. I couldn't have been more grateful for the British medical system at that point in our lives. It was incredible. You know, he says thank you, putting the flower in there at the end, but that's not a token thing. I mean, they are our miracle, I think, in Britain, if they remain to be. Yes.
I hope I'm not asking you to repeat, but I just want to understand when you say about the medics that first reached you, if the garage was there and a meter and then the wall, how did they get to you?
There was enough room. They went down. There was enough room down the end, so they had to scoot down the end of the wall.
They dropped down.
Yeah.
Spinal boards.
Yeah.
I think.
And then they dropped the boards down, and then they went from the back along.
Where Tris actually fell was a very, very dark area of Padstow, which has now become actually been turned into a lifeboat station. There were no street lamps, and Andy and I saw a reflective stripe on his New Balance sneaker. Buy a pair of New Balance, they could save your life. And it was sticking out from the shadow in the wall. And he yelled, he doesn't say this because it's not in his memory, it's not in his story, but he yelled out, and we thought it was a wild animal crying. It wasn't help, there were no words, it was just sounded like a fox. So we followed that sound, and there he was. But the sort of ravine that he fell down had an opening at the end, so the shoe was there, and they could come in end on. But they took about 2.5 hours to get there, and they were spinal boards, and yeah, I don't know how they actually did it. I didn't look at it. Yeah.
Yes, sir. I think we just have a little bit more time, Sue. Is that right? Okay. Go ahead, sir.
I just wonder whether the experience of seeing the performance has deepened your understanding of what it's like to be a patient with this industry, with this injury generally, or to be your patient specifically.
Well, I think I've had a few experiences with the medical system, and I think it really exemplifies very well is how dependent you are when you're a patient. You're completely dependent. You're always waiting for someone to make a decision, or someone to do this, or someone to do that, and it's really horrible. The thing is, this is sort of straightforward. Emergency medicine is straightforward. It's the more elective things that are more difficult, because there is much more choice. You know, most of my patients have got some sort of back pain or neck pain or arm pain related to their neck, and then you have more choice really. You don't have to have an operation. So I'm not, so in Tristan's particular case, has it changed my, I'm not sure it has changed anything too much. It's just seeing it performed, I think it reinforces my view that patients feel very helpless. And well, actually, having discussed it tonight, that feeling of, if you've got some terror in your life, it always hits you at night, doesn't it? You're awake at night, and that's when it gets you. I've never thought of that, of patients being like that, actually, and I imagine now there's lots of patients lying around in hospital beds, and when the night comes, that's when they really feel it. So maybe I've just learned that as a result of tonight's discussion.
Again, I'd like to say that, thank you to St. Anne's for allowing all of us to experience this and be a part of your lives, all three of you and your family. And I know Susan will thank me for that, but also one other thing is to, again, say how fantastic I think this performance was and how wonderful the two of you put this together and allowed people some insight into a whole host of things about the human condition. And for that, I thank you. And I thank you, Dr. Tim, for your excellent work. And hopefully we'll see you in London or wherever. And we all stay out of the hospital and stay well. That's the main thing.